let's talk repurposing, because it is an important part of building a sustainable show that is an actual sales and business asset. Molly Watts joins me today. She joined us for our Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. And this is one of the things we talked a lot about and one of the big takeaways and wins for her as we wrapped up that program. And so I wanted you to hear, not just from me, but from Molly, about how her relationship with repurposing has changed. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show. I am stoked to have Molly Watts joining me today. If we're gonna get into some stuff, and she's gonna share her show and things like that. But I want to let you know, if adjusting your relationship with alcohol is something that is on your mind this time of year, going into this year, her show is a really good one to check out. Alcohol Minimalist is the name. Again, we talk about it in the context of our conversation. Here in a minute, you'll hear that. But now is a really good time to check it out, because she is going to be releasing shortly, if she hasn't already, a fantastic series around Dry January. So if you're doing Dry January and you need a bit of a check-in, or you're curious about what Dry January is, be sure to check out her show. There are links in the show notes. It is a great opportunity to evaluate where you're at. Again, we talk about this more in the interview, but I wanted to just take a minute up front to highlight specifically some content she's got coming out this month around Dry January. So check out Alcohol Minimalist. Again, there are links in the show notes. Before we hop into the interview, I want to remind you, if you would like to join us for the Profitable Podcaster Roundtable, now is a real good time to do it, because it's coming up. So we are doing Q&A format. Drop your questions in the form when you sign up. I'll have them ready to go, and we will jump in. Questions can also be answered live on the call. We have made a change. I've been sharing about this, but I want to remind you, just in case you've missed it, we are no longer offering a replay for this call. We will no longer be sending out the recording. I want to protect this container a little bit. I want it to be a place where people feel like they can come and really get support for where they are right now in their show, because I know it can feel wildly lonely to do this alone when you're DIYing, or even if you're working with like a freelance editor. Without sort of long-term strategic support, it can kind of feel like you're making every decision over and over again all by yourself. So I wanted to create a place where you can come get feedback, you can come get questions answered, whatever the case may be. Dropping them in the form when you sign up just allows me to provide any resources, things like that. I'm not just answering it off the dome. I sort of come ready to supply you with whatever you may need to take action on whatever we cover in the call. So again, head on over to uncommonlymore.com/roundtable to reserve your spot. It is completely free, and I would love to have you join us live for our next one. One more time, that's uncommonlymore.com/roundtable. And not surprisingly, you will find the link in the show notes. Without any further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Molly. Hi, Molly. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Stacey. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited about this. I want to start at the beginning, and I want to take a minute and loop everyone in on our conversation, which is, to start with, can you tell us about your podcast and your business?
Yeah. I host the Alcohol Minimalist podcast. I have been doing that podcast now for 3 years, I think, in January 2024.
That's awesome.
Third year, or the end of 3 years. Yeah. And it's actually my second podcast. So I wasn't brand new to the podcasting realm when I started it, but
Cool.
I did it with a very specific purpose when I first launched it. I launched it to prepare for a book that I had written, and then ultimately to segue that into what I do now, which is help people and coach them to change their drinking habits and create what I say is a peaceful relationship with alcohol. So we are not a black and white. We're not a recovery program. We're not, you have to quit drinking all the way, but we are all about drinking less and obviously adding alcohol to our lives in a minimal way, hence minimalist.
I love that. I love I've been talking with friends and stuff a lot maybe this whole year about sort of like mindful consumption.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talk about that with
Mindful
food. We
drinking.
talk
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
with all these other
Absolutely.
things. We tend not to talk about it with alcohol.
Right. And it's interesting because that I think that's part of the reason that I talk about it the way that I do is because we should be talking about alcohol the same way that we talk about food or exercise or social media or anything else that we consume. Right. And this idea that only people that have a problem with alcohol should change their drinking habits is just old, outdated, you know, AA driven narrative that really doesn't pertain to what most of us experience with alcohol. And so many people can benefit from just simply reducing how much they're drinking and not necessarily, although being alcohol free is a great option. And I'm never going to deter anybody from
Yeah.
doing that too.
Well, and I think for me, the conversation that I love you're having is that it's not about yes or no.
Right.
No might be where you end up.
Right.
But that doesn't have to be your first decision. It doesn't have to be, one of the things I like that we talked about, off and on during the mastermind was this, like, you don't actually have to have a problem for like you to want to adjust your relationship with. Because again, it's something that is so invasive in our culture and so sort of omnipresent.
Right.
As just sort of the expectation. I will see, one of the things that really got me thinking about my own relationship with alcohol was seeing TikTok videos and Instagram reels of moms with like Stanley cups full of Tito's at soccer games. And I was like, you're going to drive your children home.
Right. Right.
How is this so normal that we're like joking about it on TikTok?
And I got to tell you, I'm the first. I mean, I used to go to Little League games with a sippy cup that had, stuff in it. I mean, we did that. And it's this the whole mommy wine culture is a whole nother conversation. And COVID didn't help any of us with our drinking habits.
Because all we had to do was drink.
Right. And so there's just a lot of, but I just hope that from my perspective, that I can help people understand where those limits, those safe, low risk limits are, kind of what a moderate or mindful drinking habit looks like, and the understanding that you don't have to have a problem and you don't have to choose to be sober forever if that's not what you think fits for you.
Yeah. And I think it's easier than ever to find, for lack of a better word, alternatives.
Oh, for sure.
I think about 20 years ago and like your alternative was water or mixers, essentially orange juice, Diet Coke.
Right. Yeah. For sure.
whatever whoever was drinking was mixing their alcohol into was your sober option. And now there's low alcohol options that, even like historic long time alcohol companies are putting out low alcohol or no alcohol alternatives. You're seeing a lot more like alcohol-free spirits.
Yeah.
It's never been easier to
100%
to jump into this and experiment with it. So that's one of the things I love about your show is it really invites people into the possibility, like what your options might be. Because again, we're only getting served Wine Mommy Club, Mommy Wine Club, or AA.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Or treatment. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm really excited. So I want to talk a little bit more about your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Where was your podcast at? What was your production process like? I always like to hear about people's production processes.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Before we kicked off the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind.
Yeah, I've been really spoiled because I've had the same editor since the first podcast that I did. And she is blessedly patient and blessedly like used to me dropping files on her on Tuesday or Monday that are due to publish on Wednesday. Right. So like I said, completely spoiled and I know it.
Never leave.
Trust me. I'm like, yes. And so what that has created though, is this horrible habit of not planning ahead.
She has enabled you.
Right. Not having a game plan, just, figuring out the week ahead of time, what I'm going to talk, like the 2 days ahead of time, like figuring out, like I keep like a running list of topics that I want to do. I have had the privilege of having some really great guests on the show. And I started really early in that of just reaching out to some big name people. And, they said yes. And so that has been fantastic. And so I have been, like I said, I've been lucky in that respect. But the biggest reason that, I wanted to get involved with the Profitable Podcast Mastermind, that was kind of like a tongue twister.
It is a
Profitable
little
Podcast
bit.
Mastermind was that I really wanted, my biggest problem has been that I love creating, I feel like I've created really great content, and it has not served me at all in terms of trying to sell my products. And that was really what I wanted to get from the mastermind, was more help on figuring out how to connect the two, right? Like I can have a good podcast and feel really proud of it, and it can be a valuable member of my sales team, right?
I love the language you're
Right.
choosing.
Do you
It's
like that?
great. It's great language. Clearly, you read the sales page.
Right.
No,
And-
I think so often that happens is we launch this project we're excited about, right? And our focus becomes on creating essentially a really good product, right?
Yeah.
This thing that's really good and that we're proud of, and that's important, but it's also got to work for us.
Well, yeah. And I think that there's this, what I've figured out through the process of our mastermind and kind of just exploring my own thinking around my podcast is like, okay, so say I had a website, right? And if back in the day when people blogged all the time, and I know people still blog, right? But like the blog was the content arm, right? And that was the content for the website, which just helped enable SEO and, got people there. And so I think I went into the podcast with the mindset that this is the content arm of my business, right? This is the content arm. And it should be all about serving the audience and getting people's eyes on the podcast, and, should barely mention that I actually sell things too, right?
Super, super common. And it's interesting because I think, honestly, even in the blog side of things, that has evolved.
Yeah,
And I
for
think
sure.
that, the way content is presented has evolved so much. But it's really easy when you've been creating content online for a while.
Yeah.
I've been creating content online in one form or another since 2006, 2007. When early in my son's life, I did some blogging stuff up until I decided I really didn't feel comfortable using my kid as a prop for content, and was like, I don't love this. And then I started this business 12 years ago. We started this podcast 10 years ago. Content has evolved. Content has changed a lot in that time. And more than ever, we're seeing the content sort of sit in a silo. It's less about using the content as a bridge, as an on-ramp to get them into, our website where they'll click around and then
Right.
buy from us or whatever. And more so it has to be get a contributing member of our sales team, right? We have to be building something that is doing the work of that nurture in a direction, not just an info dump.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is because there's just so much more information available to us than there was even 10, 15, 20 years ago. Even when you factor in internet time versus internet time, there's just never been more people creating content. There's never been more competition for our attention. And I think we've got a podcast episode we shared about this recently, and I'll link to it in the show notes, but we talk about this idea. And I think this is something we talked a bit about in the mastermind, this idea that we cannot spend all of our time proving how smart we are.
Right.
We cannot just sort of like convince them we know stuff and they'll go, you know what I should do? Hire this person. It's not the way content works anymore. Honestly, it used to be, which is, I think, maybe what's most frustrating.
It just makes me smile because when you said it in the mastermind, I was like, oh yeah. Oh gosh, she's just 100% calling me out. I joke around.
Rude.
I joke around in my Facebook group with I'm Hermione Granger. Like I love being right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so isn't it quite prophetic that I would be over here on a podcast, just exactly that. Like, let me prove to you how really valuable and smart I am, and you'll just naturally want to come work with me.
And you're just going to be obsessed with me because you're just going to be taken aback by my smartness.
And you'll just,
when in reality, they don't have the attention.
And even if I never tell you how I work with people, you'll just do all the work on your own. Come search me out. Come look for it.
Search me out.
Right? Click on the links in the show notes.
And just be throwing checks at me.
Right. Exactly. It hasn't worked that way.
It's so common. It's absolutely so common. So as you moved into the program, were there any sort of unexpected wins? There were things, because like you went in really focused on how do we turn these into sales assets? How do we add that sales element to already great content? Were there any sort of like, oh, this was helpful?
Yeah.
Unexpected takeaways?
Yes. I mean, a few. And so the first one was simply just the whole strategy of making a plan for the quarter ahead of time, like actually mapping that out and organizing it in a way that it's like, okay, this is an educational episode, this is a sales asset episode, and really having a framework for that going ahead of time, right? Because like I said, for somebody who has kind of been by the seat of their pants pretty much every week and looking backwards at some, like last year, I was just like, what in the world was I doing? Like, what? Like, just no sense, no logic to it whatsoever, other than just got to get a great content episode out, right? That was just kind of the always the
feeding
motto.
Feeding
the machine, for sure. So that was number one. Number two, we talked a lot, or the idea of doing an audio challenge and having that being like a 5-day, like this whole idea of just dropping 5 episodes in a week and having them be short episodes and actually calling it like an audio, well, I don't know, challenge or check-in or whatever you want to call it.
A repeatable series. Yeah.
That repeatable series. That whole concept to me was like, oh yeah, this is really good. I can see how this will really work for me. And I'm super excited to try it.
And for you, we really found out it kind of ended up being, as we looked at like big picture as we were wrapping up, we kind of figured out where you could have some repeatable series kind of as like tentpole content for you. You're like, these are your landmarks throughout the year, which is going to create so much space for you in times where you do need to be, or where it will behoove you to be more present for sales conversations and, client, because where we can put those repeatable series are sort of natural client intake seasons for you based on sort of what happens in the world in things like January and Sober October and those kind of things.
Yeah. And you just mentioned something that just made me remember something else about this. Another win is, I think for me, probably more than anything, the biggest win was the permission to repurpose episodes, to take a week off if I needed to, which I still haven't got myself to do. Well, don't know if I can get there, but you know what I mean? Just like, for whatever reason, I just have this very precious feeling about every episode that I put out there. And it's so ridiculous because it drives me to the point where I'm, because I am spending so much time and bandwidth on creation and not going to be present for the opportunities to actually sell if I got on the phone with somebody, you know what I mean? Or on a Zoom call.
I love that you brought this up because I have been looking for an opportunity to tell this story. Recently, I learned about the best instance of repurposing in the world. This was the example I will use every time somebody's like, could I really do that? Recently, do we all remember there was a movie that came out in the 2010s called Australia that starred Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman?
Yep.
Hulu has a new 6-part miniseries that is legitimately that movie cut into 6 parts with a new title.
Okay.
And they are positioning it, running ads on social, promoting this new miniseries starring Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman.
Wow.
That is straight up the movie in 6 parts.
Wow.
With a new title. So if Hulu
can do that,
we can re-release an episode.
Right? Yeah.
It'll be okay.
And I like did it. No, I haven't done it. I haven't done that fully, but I have shared a podcast. I've shared a couple of episodes where I've been on other
Mhm.
people's podcasts, and that happened fairly recently because I was in one of those moments where I was like, you will remember, I was like, so I know we're talking about next quarter. Here's the
I
problem.
remember.
Here's the problem. I have like the end of the year and I have nothing, like nothing scheduled, nothing planned. And that was when I was sick and, I had all sorts of reasons for it, legitimate reasons, but
You had legitimate reasons.
yeah, but nonetheless, that's where I was. And so the permission to like reuse stuff, to repurpose things, to just not be so tied up every week. I feel like if I was writing a blog, like if I was writing a weekly blog, like I would put it up there. And if one wasn't like really great, I'd be like, whatever. Right. But for some reason, when it comes to the podcast, I have a different mindset about that.
You're not alone. It's so incredibly common. And it's one of the reasons I love having conversations like this, because it does normalize it and it allows us to talk about the benefits of it. That's something we did. One of the things I loved about, sorry, that moment where you were like, what about the end of the year? Is we sat down, and between myself and you and our other mastermind members, we were able to come up with your December, January content. And I don't know, all of 10 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Mostly because you were like, no, Molly, you can do that. You actually can.
I'd actually really like you to do that.
Right. Reissue that. It'll be okay. So,
well, the other story I really love here is I take us back, and I'm going to be showing my age here, but I know the community around this show will also remember this time. But think about a time before DVR, a time before streaming, when you would legitimately wait for summer, hoping they would rerun the one episode you missed of like ER during the course of the season, right? You were like, man, I hope they play that January 12th episode this summer because I missed it. Like, there was this time where, and it's true now too, especially when you've been doing a show 3 years, there are new listeners all the time. There are constant demands on our attention and our capacity to consume. And so there's things people have missed. So oftentimes re-releasing them is the best service to our listeners. Not to mention, it takes a lot of times hearing something before it sinks in. This is something, we definitely talked about in the mastermind, but I want you to think about a time you've been in an event and you've heard someone talk and you're like, light bulb. You're like, whoa, I get it now. And you can immediately in your mind think about the 14 other people who have told you potentially verbatim the same sentence. And you're just like, but this is the time.
Right.
This is the moment it is sinking in. And our content's the same.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, you kind of used that language with me and reminding myself that somebody, I listen to things over again. I mean, I like to listen to things on repeat. I often find myself hearing something the second or third time around that I didn't hear the first time, and or I'm in a different place now. So the things that I heard a year ago may not have resonated, but now they do. So I just think that reminding it's easy for me to intellectualize that as a listener and so much harder for me to intellectualize that as a podcast host. And I don't know why, but you helped me, or helping me. I shouldn't say you helped. I can't say that I'm completely cured, but you're helping me do that better, I think.
I'm really glad to hear that. And honestly, I think it comes from that same place that us wanting to prove how smart we are comes from, right? We don't want to let anybody down. It's this level of responsibility that we solely put on ourselves. And right. I say we because I promise you, everything I tell to you, I have to say to myself too. I'll go to re-release something and I'll be like, no one's going to care. And this is one of the reasons I talk about the successes when we re-release content. It's one of the reasons I talk about it so much, is because oftentimes, especially those of us who like overly intellectualize these things, we have a lot of really good reasons why it's not possible.
Right?
Just well thought out. Absolutely. Like, this isn't just my feelings. I have good reasons why this is a terrible idea. And it's like, oh, wait, no, there is another side. And I think for you, what may happen is as you get to the other side of a lot of these repurposing trials that you're running over the next, honestly, probably year, as you start to explore your repeatable series more and you actually roll them out and you get to the experience of it, I think is what's really going to allow that to fully sink in so that you can be on the other side. But I will say, I have been doing this 10 years. I have been re-releasing episodes for probably 5 years, really regularly for 3 or 4 years. And I still, every time I go to do it, go, but is this really good enough to re-release?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I have to sit down, and oftentimes this is where I will tap in my team. I will tap in my coach and I'll say, I am not the most objective person to make this decision. Can you review this? This is a lot of what we do in podcast strategy intensives. Hey, can you review this and tell me that I'm not crazy, that this is a good idea? Is this what we should be running? And that confirmation can be helpful. So as you explore that over the next year, one of the great things about your group is you were all in a mastermind separate from our mastermind before that. You're all still supporting each other. Reach out to each other. Be supported by each other because you all went through that. You're all going to be going through that over the course of the next year as you really roll out some of the things we started in the mastermind.
Yeah.
Reach out and be like, am I crazy? Is this a terrible idea? Please confirm for me this is a good episode to release.
I think that what you mentioned right there, and I want to say something about that. You talked about the intensive and versus, and what I was in was the podcast mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the real true benefits of, and I haven't been in an intensive, so I won't say that I'm comparing the two, but one of the real benefits that I found in being in a mastermind was just like any other mastermind. It's what I learned from comments for the other people in our mastermind group and where they were with their podcast and while it might not be exactly where I am, so much of just hearing their struggles and what's going on reaffirms just, that I'm not crazy, and also helps me think creatively for different things, for them and for myself in terms of what I can do differently at the podcast.
It's one of the things I love about the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. It's also one of the reasons it's the size it is.
Yeah.
We have 3 to 5. That's where we cap it with this program. And it's so that we can do the kind of things we did in that container, which is really dig in to questions and talk through them. And part of that is because even if the answer somebody gives to the question isn't helpful to me, hearing somebody else's questions oftentimes is really helpful to me because it'll get me thinking about something that maybe hasn't even been on my radar. Right. Or it'll get me thinking about something differently. It'll give me, because I'll start thinking about sort of what would my answer to their question be and how would I approach the issue they're having? Or sometimes it's just like, oh, good, it's not just me. Even at different, especially when I see somebody at a different stage, like somebody who's having an issue at startup or somebody who's having an issue when they're on episode 500. And I'm like, sitting here at episode, 100, 200, 300. And I'm like, oh, this is a repeating thing that's just going to maybe show up in wearing different clothes. But the core issue is the same, especially when we get into that stuff around like proving how smart we are or re-releasing episodes or is this good enough? What's happening with my downloads? Whatever that may be. I really love that component of being able to be supported, not just by whoever is leading the program, but by hearing what's happening with the other people in the program. It's one of the reasons we rolled this out in addition to the intensives, because the intensives can be great, but it's you and me.
Yep.
And I'm great. I have no qualms sharing that.
Great.
I'm fantastic. However, other people are also fantastic.
Yeah. I just thought it was that for that purpose, it was really helpful for me, for sure.
I love that. As we wrap this up, I want to let everybody know where they can find your podcast, because I happen to have an inside know that you've got some really cool stuff coming up as we roll through the first part of next year.
Not just all reissues. Although
Honestly,
if they have
reissues are great
exactly, if
too.
you haven't been listening, you can go listen in, right? Yeah. So it is the Alcohol Minimalist podcast. You can find it on any podcast player that you are listening on, or you can find it over on my website, which is www.mollywatts.com.
And we'll, of course, not surprisingly at all, have links to it in the show notes so that you can find it very, very quickly. Molly, I want to thank you for hanging out with me. As we close out, is there any last minute things you want to leave someone who maybe is considering the program with?
Go ahead and just sign up and do it, because you will get such great long-term value. I think that's what I always want, is something that I can return back to. I just rewatched and replayed one of our mastermind sessions, the video of it, because I was just going back and reminding myself about what we were going to do and what the flow was going to be.
How we got to the plan.
Yeah, exactly. How we got to the plan. And so it just, I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed that particular construct. For me, was perfect. You were super flexible with our schedule, which I just appreciated.
We did. We got creative for you guys. It was fun.
Yep. And yeah, I think anybody that's been, and I think for me, what I found, we had pretty much, our mastermind was people in different places of their journey in terms of how long they've been doing it. One of the things that's super valuable for me is that I learned about you from somebody who I respect in the podcast industry, who's been podcasting for like 15 years. And I was like, oh gosh, if she's seeking direction for herself, what the world, I think it's just reminding me that this is something that I truly enjoy in my business. It's something that I really want to continue to be good at, and to have it be more productive for my sales process would be just icing on the cake, right? And that's what I was hoping for.
I love that. And I will say, selfishly, because I have to, it's in my contract with whoever, the planning ahead, the knowing what I need to say when I sit down, it makes it even more fun.
Right?
Because I'm not going, what do I care about? What do I have to talk about? Am I even interesting anymore? Do I have things to say? So I hope to hear when we meet a year from now that you enjoy it. You enjoy it even more then, as you've started to really embrace repurposing.
Yes. Yes, I will.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stacey.
I want to thank Molly one more time for coming on the show, because it was such a good conversation. I want to sort of remind you, I want to recap here. Her relationship with repurposing has really shifted, and it's created a lot of capacity for her to do some things with her show from a sales perspective. One of the things we don't talk enough about is feeding the machine. Endlessly coming up with new content can be detrimental to our sales, because we just don't have the capacity to do it. When you start looking at building strategic assets, working ahead, batching, repurposing, re-releasing, when you start thinking about all of these things, it's because you need to make your show more efficient. And that efficiency buys you time to put your attention other places. And for some people, that might be time off. Maybe you've got plenty of sales and you just need some time to step back, step away, to rest, to recover, because this is an output. And so maybe it's literally just buying yourself a break, or maybe it's buying you some capacity to show up in those times of years where you're a little busier, where you need to be available for sales calls or delivering for your clients. One of the things we do as we wrap up our year, as we get ready for our end of the year break, is I dramatically reduce the amount of sales calls I take. I don't really do sales calls in December, and I do very, very few in November, because we've got increased production as we get ready for our time off. I've got delivering our quarterly calls with our production clients. All of these elements are in place, and I simply need some additional capacity. And so whenever possible, we'll re-release to the feed, or we'll send emails, resharing past episodes. We'll try and streamline production and release schedule as much as we can in that time of year, to give me some space to show up for the other things I need to show up for, without cutting into my life, without shifting to a point where I'm working 10 or 12 or 14-hour days, which is certainly what my solution would have been 10 years ago in my business. And so I want you to evaluate, what can you do when you buy yourself some capacity? What is possible with that shifted capacity, with that newly found time, which is something we so rarely just discover, right? Generally is the result of some choices. These are the kind of choices we can make to suddenly find that capacity and time. If this is something of interest to you, if you listen to my conversation with Molly and you want to take her advice and just sign up, I want to invite you to do that. We are kicking off in February for our next round of the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind, and I would love to have you join it. One of the things that we talked briefly about at the end of our conversation was the fact that Molly did this with two of her mastermind peers from another program. They're accountability partners. There are a group that have worked together for some time now. This is a great program to join with a buddy. If you have a biz bestie or an accountability partner from another program or mastermind or whatever it may be, and you're both podcasters and you're both looking for support, it can be a really cool thing to do together. So I'd love to invite you and your biz bestie to join us. Again, head over to uncommonlymore.com/mastermind and you'll see all the details of the call schedule. We do share replays. As Molly mentioned, she just rewatched one of the replays from our call. I send out all of the recordings. Those are yours to keep because they can be a great thing to revisit when you go to do your next quarterly plan. If you have any questions, please reach out. But again, uncommonlymore.com/mastermind to reserve your seat. I will see you right back here next week. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.